Hello, deep divers. Great to have you with us. Today, we're doing something a bit special. We're diving deep into a whole collection of stories, analysis, insights, all pulled directly from the latest editions of Addis Fortune. That's Ethiopia's largest English weekly newspaper, for those maybe less familiar. Think of this as your shortcut, your inside track, really, to understanding the big forces shaping Ethiopia right now. We're talking huge national projects, everyday bureaucratic hurdles, Ethiopia's place in the world. It's a lot. Okay, let's unpack this.
Exactly. And what's fascinating here, and we see this week after week in the reporting at Addis Fortune, is how these stories, well, they might seem separate at first glance, but they outwardly weave together. They tell this larger narrative about development, about sovereignty, and, the sheer challenge of modernizing in a world that's changing so fast. So we'll connect those dots for you, give you a real sense of the pulse of the nation.
Right. And we have to kick off with something absolutely monumental. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, the GERD, Africa's biggest hydroelectric project. Just recently inaugurated after, 14 years in the making? It's way more than just concrete and turbines, isn't it? It feels like this huge symbol of national pride and, importantly, doing it themselves, self-financing.
It really is. It's a massive statement. I mean, picture this. A dam 170 meters high, stretching 1.8 kilometers across the Blue Nile, the reservoir behind it, 74 billion cubic meters, and the power, 5,150 megawatts installed capacity. To put that in context, that's enough electricity, potentially, to cover over half of Ethiopia's current needs, maybe even 80% within a decade. But the financing, as you said, that's what we've really highlighted at Addis Fortune. It's revolutionary. $5 billion. Okay, yes, that's nearly 4 times the original estimate, a huge jump. But over 90% of that shouldered domestically. Mainly the state-owned Commercial Bank of Ethiopia, the CBE, and critically, over 20 billion birr came directly from Ethiopians buying bonds, supporting fundraising campaigns, ordinary people.
That domestic funding part, that really shifts the narrative, doesn't it? Away from dependency, towards self-determination. Is this a model others could follow? Or are there big, maybe hidden costs to financing something this huge internally?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? The key insight isn't just the scale, it's how it was funded. This domestic model, it directly challenges those traditional development aid narratives. It offers a powerful potential blueprint for other nations looking for genuine economic independence. Though yes, it absolutely means a massive internal financial commitment. It absorbs a huge amount of domestic capital. The late Prime Minister Meles Zenawi, he launched it back in 2011, called it Project X initially. He explicitly framed it as a symbol of our Renaissance, something built with our own hands and our own resources.
Yeah.
And it's not just about power either. We're looking at whole new economic possibilities. Fisheries, maybe 10,000 tons, tourism, plus the potential for nearly $1 billion a year from electricity exports. That's a huge leap from the current $118 million. It's meant to be an engine.
A massive economic engine, yeah. But a project this big on a river shared by multiple countries, it inevitably brings major diplomatic heat. This dam has been a flashpoint for years.
Oh, absolutely. A major flashpoint. Egypt, you have to remember, depends on the Nile for over 90% of its water. 90%. So the opposition has been consistent, very strong. Leaders, past and present, have even warned about military options if their water supply feels threatened. Think El-Sisi, Sadat, more strong words. Sudan's position is, a bit more complex. They see benefits like regulated floods, maybe cheaper electricity. Former PM Hamdok acknowledged that. But they also have serious concerns about safety, and they've been pushing hard for a binding agreement on how the dam operates. And the core of the dispute often comes back to these old colonial-era treaties, 1929, 1959. Ethiopia wasn't party to them, never signed them. So as Professor Edem Kamil, a legal researcher we quoted, points out, Ethiopia argues it has zero legal obligation under treaties it had no say in.
Right. And we've seen mediation attempt after mediation attempt fail, haven't we? Washington, the African Union, no real breakthrough. And the fact that leaders from Egypt and Sudan weren't at the inauguration ceremony, that speaks volumes, doesn't it? About the gap that still exists.
It certainly does. Ethiopia's line has been consistent. The GRD is vital for its development, and they maintain it will not cause significant harm downstream. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has been firm, saying things like nothing would stop Ethiopia from now on, but also stressing we've no intention of harming anyone. Answerably. So the engineering feat is done, more or less. Now the real test, the long-term test, is diplomacy. Finding consensus on operations, on emergency plans, on fair water sharing frameworks for the future. That's the challenge.
Okay, so shifting from that huge national project, what does this all mean for Africa's broader role, especially thinking about, say, climate change. Let's widen the lens to Africa's climate crossroads. There's a real irony here, isn't there?
A profound irony, absolutely. Africa contributes just a tiny fraction of global carbon emissions, a sliver. Yet, it's bearing the absolute brunt of climate volatility. We're seeing droughts, floods, crop failures impacting tens of millions of people right now. But the moral case for climate finance is incredibly strong. But the reality, that finance is often elusive, painfully slow to arrive. And when it does come, it's often loans, not grants, which just adds to already heavy debt burdens. So Africa ends up borrowing, essentially, to fix problems it didn't create. But here's the other side of the coin, what's fascinating. Africa is also crucial to the solution, to the global green transition. It holds huge reserves of cobalt, lithium, rare earths, the minerals needed for batteries and green tech, plus massive potential for solar and wind power. And this attracts intense competition. China, the EU, the US, Gulf states, they're all in influence, access, which raises old fears, right? Fears just becoming suppliers of raw materials again, deepening that dependency.
And you mentioned this competition. Does that fragmentation hurt Africa's position? We hear calls for a united African voice at climate talks, like the COP-Ps, but then individual deals get cut.
Precisely. That lack of a truly unified front, it weakens leverage. Heads of state might give strong speeches by day, but pursue bilateral deals by night, which kind of emboldens external powers. And as we've explored in Addis Fortune, there isn't one single view on a way forward either. It's really diverse. You have some arguing quite forcefully, this isn't charity, it's compensation. We have bargaining chips, minerals, sun, wind, our young population. Let's demand industrialization, tech transfer, control over our green resources. Then at the other end, you have activists, a growing voice, rejecting the whole market-based approach. They call current climate finance carbon colonialism. They're demanding climate debt reparations from the industrial north for historical emissions. They want a fundamental break with what they see as an exploitative global capitalist system.
So a push for reparations. But I imagine there are also calls for more self-reliance too, not just waiting for external help.
Yes, exactly. Others are saying, look, let's not get stuck in this victim narrative. They argue Africa should leapfrog directly to renewables. Lead by example. Build solar mini-grids, cheap wind farms. Don't wait for handouts that might never fully materialize or come with strings attached. And there are practical ideas for that too. Tapping into domestic capital markets, there's an estimated $2 trillion in African pension and insurance assets. Seeding local green bond markets, more regional cooperation like the Southern Africa Climate Finance Partnership. But then you also have many technocrats, people working within the system who believe it's better to, sharpen the existing tools, negotiate better terms, attract commercial capital. They argue Africa has more agency than the sort of grievance narrative might suggest. It's a real mix of strategies being debated.
It sounds incredibly complex. A lot of different paths, maybe lacking that single forceful direction we saw from, say, Meles Zenawi or Thabo Mbeki in the past, almost a leadership gap.
Well, that intellectual heavyweight leadership, pushing a very confident, coherent African line, it has perhaps faded a bit. Today's negotiators are very disciplined, very professional, but maybe less daring. And they're often constrained by rising debt levels back home. So the overall verdict on these big climate summits often feels a bit underwhelming. They get called costly theatrical set pieces. Lots of talk, but maybe not enough robust delivery on the ground. The real challenge is getting funds flowing effectively, building resilience, and ensuring accountability for Africans on African terms.
Okay, let's bring the focus back down to the national level, more granular, economic transformation. How are these big global trends like sustainability impacting Ethiopia's own financial sector, especially as it starts opening up? We're hearing banks are under pressure now.
Yeah, this is a significant shift. It's really being driven by a few key things. The development of the federal capital market, especially the new Ethiopian Securities Exchange, the ESX, which launched mid-2024. Also the influence of the International Finance Corporation, the IFC, and the Ethiopian Capital Market Authority, ECM. Thinking is, companies wanting to list on the new exchange will be much more attractive, especially to foreign investors, if they have strong sustainability practices. So the focus is now on adopting international standards, specifically the IFRS S1 and S2 standards, which deal with climate-related sustainability disclosures. The Accounting and Auditing Board, AABE, is drafting a roadmap. The plan is to roll it out first to state-owned enterprises, banks, insurers, and then listed companies.
And why banks specifically? Are they feeling the pressure more acutely?
They definitely are. Freezer Ayalu, who's the Director of Banking Supervision at the National Bank of Ethiopia, he told Addis Fortune quite plainly, as banks look for more foreign capital, as competition increases, sustainability reports are becoming almost a basic requirement. If an Ethiopian bank wants to borrow from a foreign company now, that report is often one of the conditions. It's becoming standard practice. Plus, many are already moving towards ESG frameworks, environmental, social governance, and adopting Basel II standards anyway. The Ethiopian Bankers Association, the EBA, even put out guidelines. They got some help from the IFC on this, based around 5 pillars: governance, strategy, risk management, performance, and crucially, disclosure. It's a move towards greater transparency.
It sounds like a pretty comprehensive shift they're pushing for. But is it easy to implement? I mean, are there hurdles for banks not used to this level of, well, sustainability reporting?
Oh, absolutely. There are real challenges. Money, for one. Financial constraints are a barrier, and expertise, finding people who know how to do this kind of reporting properly. There's also a bit of a debate about how fast this should happen. Tilahun Esmail, the CEO of the new stock exchange, ESX, he actually pushed back against making it mandatory for listing right away. His point was, maybe the investor demand isn't quite there yet locally, so he suggested voluntary guidelines for now. But then you have finance experts like Takedo Elemu arguing, no, this is critical, it's essential for integrating into global finance, for ensuring responsible growth, growth that doesn't jeopardize the future. So it's this tension between ambition and practical reality.
Okay, let's unpack this. Moving to another absolutely vital sector for Ethiopia, coffee. Huge cultural and economic importance. But it's facing some tough new rules targeting something called export diversion. What exactly is that problem?
Right, export diversion. Essentially, it's when high-quality coffee beans, the good stuff meant for export markets where they fetch higher prices, get illegally siphoned off. They're rerouted into the domestic market instead, often because local prices are temporarily higher, and it avoids export controls and scrutiny. Our reporting at Addis Fortune found that just in the last fiscal year, 2023-24, officials seized 775 tons of export-grade coffee being diverted. That's worth about 100 million birr. Israel Dejval from the Coffee Exporters Association, he even mentioned these things called paper exporters, entities with a license who might not even realize it, possibly used as fronts. And with local consumption rising, it's now around 2.3 kilos per person, and domestic prices sometimes surging, the incentive for this illegal trade is unfortunately quite strong. It damages Ethiopia's reputation internationally.
So the government, through the Ethiopian Coffee and Tea Authority, or ECTA, is trying to stamp this out. What are the new rules? How are they meant to stop this diversion?
They've amended the Coffee Marketing and Quality Control Law, and the changes are quite assertive. First, they've significantly hiked the capital needed to even get an export license. It's now 15 million birr for an individual, 20 million for an association or company, plus you need proof of a year's worth of financial activity, basically raising the bar to weed out casual or potentially shady operators. They're also bringing in mandatory quality control checks and digitizing the whole licensing system. Think paperless submissions, QR codes on certificates, better tracking. Exporters now must have their own certified quality testing labs and employ licensed cuppers, professional coffee tasters. And crucially, each cupper can only work for one exporter, preventing conflicts of interest. And those shell arrangements you mentioned, where one person or group might hold multiple licenses to hide their activities, totally banned now, closing a major loophole.
Sounds like a serious crackdown, much needed maybe to rebuild trust and ensure quality, but are these rules getting at the root causes or just the symptoms?
That's the core debate, really. Critics worry these rules, while perhaps necessary, might not address the deeper structural issues, things like lack of access to finance for legitimate exporters. We spoke to one, Ababe Amelga, who said his cooperative defaulted last year simply because they couldn't get loans. Yields are also still quite low, but 7.5 quintals per hectare. So even though Ethiopia produces maybe 800,000 tons of coffee a year, only about 300,000 tons actually got exported last year, earning $1.43 billion. Authorities think that number could be much higher. And then there's this really interesting kind of perverse incentive highlighted by agroeconomist Shimila Soraya. He explained that for some involved in the export chain, the real value isn't the profit margin on the coffee itself, it's getting access to hard currency, the forex. They then use that forex to import other goods, electronics, cars, whatever, that have much higher profit margins on the domestic market. So the coffee export becomes almost a loss leader, just a way to get dollars.
Wow, so the coffee itself is just the ticket to getting foreign currency. That really puts a different spin on the economics of it.
It really does. It shows the complexity. Now, the ECTA Director General, Dugna Devella, he has ambitious goals. He wants to double exports to 600,000 tons, push the average price up. He acknowledges stronger controls and traceability are needed. But Shimla Saraya's warning, his analogy, is quite stark. He said, when the British colonial government in India paid people to kill snakes, locals started breeding them. His point is, policies need to be smart. They need to anticipate how people might game the system, or they could backfire.
That's a really pertinent analogy. Okay, let's shift now to something that impacts ordinary citizens very directly, especially students. Here's where it gets really interesting. This story about a new tax ID requirement for university students that apparently caused, well, total logjam. This really shows policy hitting reality, right?
Oh, this story definitely highlighted that collision. We followed it closely. The Ministry of Revenue suddenly mandated that every student heading to a public university needed a taxpayer identification number, a TIN, before term started. The stated purpose, according to Derege Fauna at the ministry, was to finally fix the long-standing problems with the higher education cost-sharing scheme. Basically, to keep track of students better, so they can eventually collect the repayments. Students cover their own food and lodging, plus 15% of tuition costs. They're supposed to pay that back once they start working, typically 10% of their salary, for up to 15 years. Essentially a graduate tax.
And the problem before was just poor tracking. People weren't paying it back, or couldn't be found.
Exactly. Record keeping was apparently terrible. Enforcement was patchy. Malebo Mancha, an alumni director at Arba Munch University, told us about students showing up 10 years late to settle their dues. Plus, a study found many private companies just weren't bothering to make the deductions from graduate salaries. And sadly, about 40% of graduates, especially in humanities and social sciences, don't find a job within a year anyway, so the repayment pot was often half empty. A necessary reform in theory.
In theory. But the rollout sounds like it was less than smooth. What actually happened to the students trying to get these TINs?
It was pretty chaotic, by all accounts. We heard from students like Barnabas Dejafu, getting ready for Haramaya University. He spent 3 whole days just trying to get this number, bouncing between offices, getting conflicting information. One place says his national ID is fine, the next demands a local residence card. Then the local office says he's too young for that card. Just bureaucracy run wild. Another student, Salishi Bade, just felt lost, no clear info, deadline looming. And this wasn't just a few students, the timing was also terrible. This directive landed right during the busiest time for tax offices, the end of the fiscal year, when everyone's paying their annual taxes. So you had revenue offices already struggling, suddenly hit with hundreds of students queuing up every day. And it impacted others too, like a civil engineer we profiled, Alema Tadez, who needed a TIN for a license upgrade. He faced weeks of delay, worried about losing contracts because the system was clogged with students.
So it created this ripple effect, impacting regular taxpayers too, because the system was just overwhelmed by the student rush.
Precisely. The Addis Ababa Public Service Bureau had to bring in mandatory overtime, extend working hours just to cope. Ermias Angulo, a director there, confirmed the immense strain, constant network glitches. They were trying to process over 400 students a day in his office alone. They ended up dedicating 3 out of 5 service windows just to students, giving them priority. You have to see it in context, too. Ethiopia's overall tax collection, the tax to GDP ratio, has fallen quite a bit from over 12% down to about 7.5%, so the government is under pressure to boost revenue. They hope to fund a big chunk of the current budget, 1.2 trillion birr, domestically. Tax expert Baruch Nagasi framed it starkly. Cost sharing is a debt must be paid. He sees the TIN requirement as necessary to end a chaotic process. His suggestion: maybe station revenue officers directly at the universities during registration next time.
From individual student struggles to the broader city, let's look at urban development in Addis Ababa. The city cabinet pushed through a major overhaul of construction rules. Hailed by some, but causing frustration for developers too. What's the goal here?
Yeah, this is a big one for Addis. The old construction permit system was widely seen as, well, broken, just not working. Victor Bellishu from the Construction Permitting Control Authority put it bluntly to us. The old system was theoretically ideal, but practically impossible. Quote, the problem was developers could get permits, but then nothing would happen. They'd just delay building, or maybe just fence off the land for years, stalled development everywhere. So the aim of this reform is multifaceted. Modernize how the city manages development, try to unlock these stalled projects, and provide much clearer, measurable, and enforceable parameters. Make the approval process faster, more predictable, attract investment. The authority also says it will now inspect projects foot by foot for safety.
Okay, so trying to unblock the system, what are the actual key changes, and why the mixed reaction?
Well, first, there's some added flexibility, which developers seem to like. A tolerance band, 5 to 10% variation allowed now on plot size and frontage, especially helpful for smaller or oddly shaped plots. One developer we spoke to, Alamnesh Tadiz, saw her potential land loss shrink significantly because of this. So that's positive. But the really controversial bit is this new merger clause. It says if you own a plot on a main road, and it's under 500 square meters with less than 20 meters of frontage, you must legally merge your plot with your neighbors before you can get a building permit. As Alamesh pointed out, that's a tricky. We all know not every neighbor is willing or financially able to cooperate. You can't force partnership easily. Professor Abebi Dinku, a civil engineering expert at Addis Ababa University, was quite critical. He called it urban planning through coercion, not coordination. He argued the city should rely on proper master plans, not forced mergers. And this really highlights a core tension you see in rapidly growing cities everywhere, right? The push for state-led efficiency versus the complex reality of individual property rights and relationships.
A classic planning dilemma. Forced cooperation versus organic development. It sounds like a real mix of trying to streamline things but potentially creating new roadblocks.
It is. There are other changes too. Setback distances, how far buildings have to be from the road, have been adjusted based on road width. Wider roads mean bigger setbacks, narrower roads less. There are also special guidelines now for really high-density areas like Mercado or near Edna Mall, and rules about harmonizing the look of buildings on small pocket plots, limiting how far balconies can stick out, ensuring street-level alignment for pedestrians. City officials, like Eskinder Gedlu from the Plan and Development Bureau, believe this will encourage denser development along main roads, allow taller buildings maybe up to 150 meters, and even correct injustice for people displaced by past projects. But Professor Abe remains cautious, warning it could still end up wasting land or stalling investment if people can't or won't merge their plots.
Okay, finally, let's turn to the private sector stepping up. Specifically in healthcare, a critical area. Washington Healthcare, they're planning a stock market debut, an IPO, while also pursuing a public-private venture. Tell us about this.
Yes, this is a really interesting example of private initiative tackling a major public need. Washington Healthcare, WHC, was founded back in 2013 by Dr. Marcos Faleke. Started with about $3 million capital, now valued around $10 million. They already run 2 secondary care centers in Addis, seeing hundreds of patients daily, employing about 400 staff. But their big ambition now is the Washington Tertiary Hospital. It's a huge project planned in 2 phases, costing around $240 million total for 500 beds. Phase 1, about $70 million for 110 beds, is set to open next year, and they're aiming high. They want to offer the country's first private radiation therapy service and build a recognized cancer center of excellence. Dr. Marcos envisions serving maybe 800,000 patients a year eventually.
That's incredibly ambitious. And the financing, an IPO and a public-private partnership, that's juggling quite a bit.
It's definitely a dual-track approach. Dr. Marcos explained the IPO timing is strategic. He sees it helping move finances towards our newest projects. And launching it around the time the new hospital opens should theoretically boost the share valuation. Of course, going public means big changes. They have to legally convert from a private limited company to a share company, which brings a lot more regulation and public disclosure requirements. Hannah Telku at the Capital Market Authority mentioned they've already held dozens of introductory sessions on IPOs, and they're licensing service providers to help companies navigate this. But as economist Giram Amahai pointed out, IPOs mean new rules, which could be a real challenge for companies not used to that level of financial transparency. Simultaneously, WHC is talking with St. Paul's Millennium College Hospital. That's the largest state-run tertiary hospital, but it struggles with the resources despite having new buildings. So a public-private partnership there fits perfectly with the government's strategy of encouraging private sector involvement in healthcare, even promoting medical tourism down the line.
And the need for this kind of advanced care is just huge in Ethiopia right now.
Immense. A WHO report from last year really laid it bare. Very limited tertiary care capacity overall. Only one of the country's 28 comprehensive specialized hospitals is actually private. Think about this. 1 in 10 patients needs tertiary level care. Trauma cases make up 70% of hospital patients. Hospitals are so full the referral rate, because of lack of beds, can be 50%. And tragically, about 4% of emergency patients die before they can even be transferred. Those numbers just underscore the massive gap that WHC is trying to help fill. And Dr. Marcos is also really pushing for international accreditation, specifically the U.S.-based Joint Commission Standard, JCS. He sees that global benchmark as absolutely essential to gaining patient trust. It's a strong signal of quality.
Wow. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We hope it's given you a clearer view and some new insights to consider.